Hello, hello. Good afternoon. Thanks everybody for joining us, and thanks everyone who's tuned in streaming live from home. We are going to be talking all about touring. Touring can be a rewarding and exciting part of the muso life, but it can also be lonely, daunting, and a bloody slog. It's not unusual for folks to find solace in substance use and other self-destructive behaviours to help manage the pressures of touring life, but there's got to be a better way. Thanks for joining us all for our very first live session of On My Mind. On My Mind is our monthly series exploring issues impacting the mental health and well-being of people working in music. We're here today with the support from Headspace app, and my name is Ash King. I'm the in-house psychologist with Support Act. At Support Act, we honour the legacy of First Nations people, and today we are gathering on Wurundjeri land, and we're grateful to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and the lands we each live, work and thrive on. We welcome First Nations guests joining us today and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. So this afternoon, I am very, very grateful to be joined by this incredible panel. We've got artist, singer-songwriter and session drummer for Baker Boy and Chasing Ghosts, Benny Clark. Welcome, Ben. We've got artist, producer and from the Teskey Brothers, Brendan Love. Howdy.
Thank you for having me.
We've got singer-guitarist Cash Savage. Hey there, Cash.
G'day.
And lighting designer Kate Hall. Thanks for joining.
Hi, nice to be here.
So today we're going to be talking about life on the road and how we might together create a more supportive touring culture. You know, we might start with the nice fluffy stuff. I think that when it comes to touring, a lot of maybe emerging people in the music industry think, you know, that's where I want to be and that's what I want to do. And of course, there is some good stuff of being out on the road. So I'd love to hear maybe from each of you. Brendan, you want to kick off? You know, what's the best thing about being on tour?
Yeah, it's always hard to talk about the worst things about being on tour, because obviously we're incredibly lucky to be able to tour. I think especially after COVID, I think we could all agree that just how much we missed it. So there's a lot good to it. For me, I think it's just the camaraderie that gets formed between the crew and all the musicians. I mean, obviously playing music is a big part of it, but I just love the in-between spaces where you get to just hang out with your extended family and reunite with people overseas that you maybe hadn't seen for a while. And yeah, it really just creates a tight bond and feels like a family away from a second family, basically.
Yeah, awesome. How about you, Ben?
Yeah, I'm very much the same. It's that opportunity to, every artist and band that I've played for has kind of been, I've been lucky for it to be a bit of a long-term thing. So it hasn't really been an in-and-out one-show thing. So being able to finally catch up and go and hang out and be a part of that family dynamic and be with those people that you care for and care about you. But at the same time, it's you make a lot of friends in the music industry and you only really get to see them when you're on tour. Mm-hmm. So you kind of get the festival, I'm like, oh, so-and-so's playing this, my person's playing. So you get to, catch up with your friends that you haven't seen in, well, even pre-COVID 2 years, but it could be 6, 7, 8 months before you see people. So it's nice to have that as well.
Yeah, the element of connection is really important.
Yeah.
Kate, how about for you?
Absolutely the same thing. I mean, the relationships are so strong when you're with people 24 hours a day. So they are more like family than some of your actual family members that you don't get to see because you're on the road so much. And again, I've had some clients that have been 20 years long. So we've really some of us have really grown up together, and they're the things that I hold most precious about touring. There's all the ancillary things like, you get to see some amazing sights and go to some amazing countries, but it's the people that you meet, and you can not see them for 10 years, but because you've had that bond of touring together, it's like nothing ever changes between that relationship. So,
Cash, what about you?
Yeah, generally that sort of stuff as well. I think for me the connections both within the crew that you're travelling with and the audience is probably a big one for me. I mean, I think my favourite thing about touring is gigs. I have a wonderful crew of humans that have been, a lot of the band that I tour with, we've been together for a long time. So there's definitely aspects of that. I love touring with them, but for me, I mean, I've just come off a European tour, and for me to travel around the world and to be able to connect with so many strangers through music is pretty amazing and incredible. So that's probably right now my answer.
Yeah, amazing. But, you know, obviously, along with all the good, you know, there's also some stuff that can be incredibly challenging. And there's a lot going on, you know, when you're out on tour, you know, away from family and friends, even though you've kind of got a new community on tour, but also a lot of disruptive schedules, lots of transitioning from one place to the next. You know, I'd also like to hear about, you know, the most challenging aspects being away from home and being on tour.
Yeah, well, I guess touring presents a very unique set of circumstances that are, you know, very, well, the antithesis of good practice in mental health, I suppose, as far as it's a challenge to your regular schedule day to day. Keeping your diet on track is a challenge. You're basically not in control of the most important things such as diet, sleep, and having your support network around you. Yeah. And so for me, yeah, that's probably the hardest thing to balance, is just trying to find ways to bring the practices I do at home onto the road, and then, you know, try and create systems and support networks on the road to try and help me get through.
Yeah, we'll dive into that a little bit deeper, because yeah, it's one of those things I think as well that people who do spend a lot of their life touring, you know, they're going to sit down with a counsellor or psychologist who, you know, runs through all the things that are the most important for one's mental well-being. You know, things like, you know, getting movement and diet and sleep, and, you know, clearing off substances and that stuff. All that is kind of, like you said, all up in the air and really disrupted when it comes to life on tour. So we'll dig a bit deeper into that in just a moment. But Benny, what about you? Like, what are the real challenges that show up for you when you've been on tour?
So, I mean, I've been very lucky, of course, in the last 5 years to be with Baker Boys. So the type of touring is a little bit easy. You kind of get flown up, flown back. It's, you know, it's a little easier in that retrospective. But I do come from a hardcore punk background where it was get in a 12-seater and you disappear for a month and you have to drive to each show. Like, people would think, you know, Adelaide and Sydney's not that far away, get on a plane, it's an hour and a half. But when you have one show in Sydney, being paid $200, and you got 6 people in a 12-seater driving 8, 9, however many hours for one show, $200, that's hard. I think with the stuff that I do now, it's important moment. I try to be everyone's biggest fan, whether it be different bands or family members or friends, and I think it's missing those really important things with family. So whether it be birthdays or I missed my sister's engagement party because I was playing a show. So it's having that, it's very hard. There isn't really an ability to try and separate the two, because it's kind of like it's your job. You're going to miss things. I've missed birthdays, New Year's. You know, like that's probably the hardest thing for me, is missing those moments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Kate, how about you?
Yeah, absolutely. There's the challenges of trying to maintain a healthy lifestyle on the road. There's the missing the relationships back home. I think one of the hardest things too is also adjusting to life when you come home from tour. You're used to, on the road, someone telling you what time to get up, providing you lunch. You know, there's a lot that's not in your control when you're on the road. And that first 3 or 4 days coming back, there's a real transition, and especially, you know, if you're in a relationship or you've got kids, coming back and trying to work out, you know, where everyone's role is at that point can be quite challenging. Or alternatively, if you're coming home to an empty house, that can be really difficult as well. So I think it's not just the challenges on the road, but it's also the challenges when you're coming off the road too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And I self-managed for a long time, and I still TM or am the second person to go to TM wise, but I actually do a lot of the behind the scenes work with the band, and so it's a big factor for me. All those things that everyone's talking about, because it's not just someone missing an anniversary or an engagement party, there's their mood on the day because they're missing that, and how that affects everybody else as well. There's flow-on effects of that lifestyle. It's sort of like living in 2 different dimensions, where you've got this cyclical nature of the band moving. You're just going from day to day, because you don't necessarily have to think about what's coming up the next day. you're only concerned about what's coming up in the next hour or the next when the dinner is on at the gig, or and what time sound check is and what time performance time is. These are 3 things you need to know, and you don't have to worry about anything else. And then you come back into a life that has just been going on without you there, and then you've got to try and... It's like trying to jump into a skipping rope, you know. And so it's... and often I've got a family, I've got a kid, I've got other members with kids, and trying to get back into that lifestyle, you got to hit the ground running because your partners or your co-parents have been looking after the children like solid for the last however many weeks. You got to hit the ground running straight away. That's quite a difficult thing to try and balance. And so yeah, the biggest. I mean, there's the long drives and there's the late nights, and you might do a gig in one place at 1 a.m. and then have to be at 1 p.m. at a festival for a next gig. There's all that stuff, but you can roll with, for me, I can roll with those things. That the hardest part is actually that you've also got to function as a person in the other dimension at the same time, and that's very tricky.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Cash. So, Brendan, you've been quite vocal, I guess, about, your own mental health journey, and you've done a lot of touring. I think, was there a time for you when you're on the road when you kind of had to confront some truths about the fact that your mental health might have been deteriorating?
I think for me, it was definitely very, very hard times on the road, but I think it was that coming home period, I think, because when you're on the road, like Cash was saying, you sort of just... the show must go on, unfortunately. I know that's not the best attitude to have, but, there wasn't enough time to process what was going on. It was just sort of get here, get there, get to the airport, play the show, do this, do that. It wasn't until I sort of got off a tour, re-entering the sort of atmosphere at high speed was where it hit me. And yeah, I was like, geez, maybe I can't do this. Like, maybe being a touring musician isn't for me. And, rather than just quit music and go do a normal job, I thought, well, I probably could get some help, at least try that first before making any rash decisions. So yeah, it was sort of coming off the road and reflecting, I think, and having the space to kind of go, wow, something's not right here.
Yeah, so what were you noticing, I guess, in your thoughts or your feelings? Like, what was showing up that you're like, maybe I should get some help?
Oh, I mean, just, all of the classic stuff of just insane anxiety and big bouts of depression and not being able to leave the house and just pushing people away and really irritable for no reason and just, I think I noticed how I was treating others. That was the big thing for me. I was like, man, I am such an asshole, and I tried not to be. And I think that was where I was like, man, something's not right. But yeah, there's just huge periods of just wanting to give up and quit everything, and just where my mind was going was just, looking back now I can go, wow, I really wasn't in a good state of mind, but at the time it just seems so rational. I'm like, yes, I must quit all of these things I've been working so hard on. That is the obvious answer. Yeah. Instead of just going, maybe I'm not in the right frame of mind.
Yeah, well, a lot of those sort of really hypercritical or sort of destructive thinking patterns can take hold and become incredibly convincing in our own mind at the time, and especially if our own sort of self-care practices have been really hampered by living day to day different climates and cities and traveling. So yeah, I have to really admire the courage that it takes as well to recognise, I could use some help. And I think we need a lot more of that in the music industry, because a lot of people have notions about what it means to connect with what's going on in their mind and their body and their behaviour, and recognising the importance of mental health now. You mentioned as well, how you're kind of operating within your relationships, and I think that, Benny, like you said, relationships is something that does get, your relationships do get impacted when it comes to touring life. I'd like to hear more about... Whoop. Nice. Just a lovely choice alarm there. Okay. Guys, in our exciting turn of events, we will now be evacuating the building. Okay, thank you. And we're back. So, apologies for that. We just had a small excursion outside to the driveway for an emergency evacuation, but all looks good, so we have returned and we're back for more. We're here with On My Mind, the On the Road edition, exploring mental health and wellbeing on tour. And I think where we left the conversation before was talking about relationships. Obviously, relationships are something that gets severely disrupted when you're pulling yourself away from, all your close family and connections to go on tour for, weeks, months, years at a time. So, Benny, what has been your experience with, what happens with your relationships when you go on tour and what sort of disruptions happen?
Yeah, so I mean, in the sense of friendship groups, it is hard to, I guess, keep a very solid, normal group of friends. Most people will go down and have dinner Friday night and maybe go to the pub Saturday and watch the footy and do whatever else, but I'm on a plane somewhere. So my catching up with friends is very much after work during the week, grab a quick feed. It's not your, I guess nothing's really normal, but your normal sense of having a friendship group or having those support systems. Family can be very much the same. It's, your family's always going to be there, but you're not necessarily going to see them as much as you'd like to. I mean, my parents live up bush, so I see them when I get the opportunity, which is really bad, I know, but you do what you can with what you got. And in the sense of other types of relationships, I guess your normality of relationships, it takes a very special person, I guess, to stick by someone who does travel so much and work so much. I work a full-time job as well as travelling nearly every weekend. So it's rough to try and handle relationships, but when you do find those, and I've been very lucky, when you do find those particular people in a friendship group that, I've got two friends especially that I've been friends with for 25 years and we've all played music together and, I consider those two my biggest support people. So it's not so much about having loads and loads of friends and lots of people, it's how many of those really particular people that are your support systems and really have your back.
Yeah, and sort of get the work that you do and understand why it's important. I think, my husband's also a touring musician and session musician.
Yeah.
And even when he's not on tour, he's working evenings and he's working weekends. And so there'll be parties that he misses out on, or people, kind of just assume now, like when I show up to something and, he's not there, they're just like, well, he's working, because it's operating on like a different schedule to everyone else who's in the sort of the 9-to-5 world. And sometimes that can be hard to communicate. I think as well, sometimes for families and close relationships, it can bring up some emotional tension as to like, well, what's going to be considered more or less important, like work or family and these family obligations. Benny, you mentioned that, sometimes being on tour has meant that you have missed out on certain, important events. How does that leave you feeling?
I mean, it really depends, I guess, on the event. If it's things like my birthday or New Year's, I'm not really too concerned. But things like, I haven't spent New Year's with friends and family for close to 7 years. I've been away, which is amazing as well. It's kind of that double-edged sword. It's like I could be home with my family, eating food, doing whatever else for New Year's Eve, or I could be on Falls Festival. And it's like both are really, really cool. So it's having that. And my family is super, super supportive in what I do. I mean, I come from an era where, Dad would drive me to shows when I was 13 and sit in his car in the city for hours on end until I finished playing. So I'm really lucky to have a super supportive family in that retrospect. But look, it is hard. It depends on the event. We played Dreamtime at the G at the MCG. It was our first massive show. It was booked, and then my sister's engagement party was booked the same night. So I was one of those, I'm not going to miss the wedding, but I may never play the MCG again for Dreamtime at the G, which, as an Aboriginal man playing in an Aboriginal group, we may never get the opportunity to do again. So it's one of those, like, they're both really important, and which way do you go about it? And you're going to feel bad either way. So if I went to the engagement, I'm going to feel bad for Baker Boy because he's left without a drummer. Where if I go to play the show at the MCG, I'm going to leave my sister without her brother at her event. Luckily, my sister's a bit of a badass, and she said, if you don't play the MCG, you're an idiot, so go and do that. Unfortunately, just to add on top of that mental health spectrum and looking at that, it rained, and the show got rained off. We never played anyway. So we did sound check the MCG. As we were running up the stairs, Denzel's pumped, or Baker Boys pumped everyone up. We went to run out, and the event organiser goes, "We can't push the stage out because the grass is too wet, so you can pack up and go home." So there's also that side of it as well. So I didn't actually need to miss the engagement. So when I got there, and it was 5 people left, like, "How'd the show go?" I didn't play it. It rained. So you have moments like that too, where it's now like, you feel like everyone's now going to be disappointed because you didn't go to this, but this never ended up happening anyway. So you do have to live and navigate those things as well.
Yeah, lots of, emotions in the mix there, disappointment and fear of missing out.
There was a couple of weeks of sad Baker Boy camp in that one, yeah.
Of course. I think that, if that's going to happen, you've kind of got to sit with it. But again, at the same time, it's like no time for that, on to the next thing, which can be, know, how it goes with living in music too, hey?
Yeah, very much so.
Thanks for sharing, Benny. Kate, what about you? Do you have any experiences sort of within your relationships that have maybe been disrupted thanks to touring life?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen a lot of people struggle with their relationships, marriages, those sort of things. But I think it really has changed a lot for me since I had a child too. I think you can navigate with your friends, especially the long-term friends, the ones that you've known since high school and stuff, that you're busy and you'll find times to accommodate those relationships. And whether it's via phone or Zoom, there's lots of technologies that you can do that. But I think once you start having children, that makes things very different on the road. And, I'm fortunate that a lot of the artists that I work with also have children, so they understand that that's a different relationship and make time for people to, fly home more frequently if they need to, or potentially bring your kids on the road with you, which is challenging in itself, but it's definitely changed how I view being away and whether I do want to take those overseas tours anymore and be away for prolonged periods. But I think it's a constant feeling of guilt because you feel that you're either letting your client down because you're not 100% present when you're on the road with them, or you're letting your child or your partner or whoever it is back home down because you're away from them so much. So it is a matter of balancing that guilt, and I don't think that's something that ever really is something that you come to terms with. It's changed the way that I relate to other parents at school because you can't, you're the one who's always asking for favours. You're the one that's always saying, "Listen, I'm not going to be able to do the soccer run, I'm not going to do this." So, there's a lot of stuff that you sacrifice to be on the road. And I think that's something that's always going to be a bit difficult and challenging and hard to navigate. So,
yeah, guilt does seem like a sort of a big feeling that comes up, and boy, it can be a really uncomfortable one to have to exist with and sit with. We like to think that maybe there's a perfect recipe to allow ourselves a way out. But Kate, just like you expressed, it's not as easy as that. You can't make the one right decision that makes everyone happy, and there's going to be times that people are going to be left disappointed. We can't please everyone, and we can't always please ourselves too. Cash, you've got a little one too. What's been your experience of sort of feelings of guilt? And maybe even if you can explore a bit about relationships and how things aren't all sort of hunky-dory as soon as you come back from tour and you get back to family life.
Yeah, well, as I said before, it's like the two different dimensions you live in, and they're very unforgiving of each other. They don't exist very well together, so it is very tricky. And, with your family members and your friends, they've seen you work so hard to get to where you are that they're forgiving of you when you miss important events because they know how hard you've worked to get to that point. Children, that's a different thing because they don't, as if like they will never understand that. But we've got a lot of Last Drinks kids now, and they are just as much as an important factor in our touring schedules as the adults, and they have to be. And like there's things like Look, we made a big fuck up. We've got a tour booked for September, and one of the weeks is during school holidays. That's going to put a lot of pressure on the other parents and other co-parents, and that's a hang up from the tour was booked in 2020, and now it's been rescheduled, and it's been rescheduled into this date that none of us picked up straight away. That's a thing. Like, these are the kind of factors that you actually have to pay attention to make, to try and make it as easy as possible for everybody in that, including the kids. But we do things like we have a band Christmas party every year, and all the kids come along to that, and all the partners or all the other people who are involved in raising our families. And yeah, the big thing for us is just constantly factoring. I mean, there is no real easy way to exist as a touring musician as well as in the real world, and particularly as you get older. When you're in a band in your 20s, everybody's life is chaos, and then as you get older and all your friends and family members get jobs in the non-music, they start sitting into this cycle of 9 to 5 work, and weekends are their time off. Whereas all your music mates, you'll see them on a Tuesday night. That's easy as, but not necessarily for the people who are outside of that world. And as you get older, you notice like everybody locks into their time schedules, and as a musician, you don't have that. You never will, and so you don't. Then it becomes even a little bit more isolating, or just a little bit more work to keep those relationships, to maintain those relationships. Yeah, it's a lot of work. Is basically the gist of that.
Yeah, that's, follows through with some really interesting research that I've read recently, which is that it's not so much about how much time we might have off that can be, impacting our happiness and well-being, but it's more to do with the time that we have off that correlates with the time that other people have off at the same time, particularly the people that we love and care about. So when, like you said, people are starting to enter into a different schedule or rhythm, and you just suddenly stop seeing them because you can't go out to any of the things that they're holding because they're all on days and nights that you're working. It can really impact our relationships, and it can really impact our sense of well-being. And Brendan, we sort of briefly touched on a bunch of other things that really impact our well-being, and you mentioned how a lot of those can absolutely be sort of thrown to the dogs when you're on tour. I'm curious as to if you have any sort of ways of implementing some of that structure, that self-care structure, while on tour that's kind of been working for you.
Yeah. I mean, I'm very lucky that we're in a position now where we can start, I guess, facilitating an environment that is conducive to, better mental health and just better well-being for everyone. But yeah, I mean, it starts as early as when the tour is booked and the tour starts being advanced by tour managers and things like that. And just looking at it and going, well, how many days on are there? How many days off are they? Where are the days off? Getting sent that early and just sort of going, all right, well, I'm going to have a day off here in a city that I don't know anyone. Probably, may or may not be alone depending on what the rest of the crew's doing. So just sort of flagging those moments and going, all right, let's just try and book, I don't know, a bowling match, or let's just try and do something that day so that we can sort of all stay together and just, not fall in that hole of, it's very easy to just go to your hotel room and shut the blinds and just stare at the TV and eat bad food or whatever your vice is. I don't know. I don't drink or do drugs, luckily, but definitely the junk food and Netflix is a big one. So yeah, starting there, and then just also, I mean, it's been a big learning thing for me, and I think our whole crew, of just what actually does facilitate a good environment for everyone's well-being. And so just talking openly about it, and fostering an environment where there's no stigma around it, and we can actually just talk to each other about how we're each going and checking in with each other. And when we first started that, it felt a little strange because it was almost regimented about, it can feel uncomfortable to just sort of go, so how are you going today, mate? But the more you do it, the more it just becomes natural, and the conversation doesn't necessarily need to be, so how is your mental health today, mate? You can just go, hey, mate, how you going? Do you want to get a coffee? Or you can, Liam, the drummer in our band, is very, very good at I mean, I've known him since I was probably 12 or 13. He's very good at looking at me and going, let's go get a coffee. Like, he doesn't even need to say it anymore because you can just see the signs in me. So I think just creating that environment where everyone's looking out for everyone and creating a space where, you know, it's safe to just go, hey, I'm having a really shit day. Can we push sound check, or can we, you know, is there anything we can do to just help take the pressure off today? So, yeah.
Yeah, that just sort of brought up something that Cash mentioned earlier, I think, which is when you're on tour, and particularly like not just sort of within the band unit, but I imagine sort of everyone else who's on the road with you too, you're living so closely, existing so closely alongside other people that kind of the emotional worlds that they're occupying and the things that are coming up for them can directly impact everyone around them. Have you had experiences where you've sort of noticed that people around you haven't been doing all that great, or and that's sort of impacted how you're feeling and operating?
Yeah, never tour with anyone with a bad back. Like, if you have a bad back and you're a musician, your touring days are done. Yeah, we do a lot of check-ins. There's a few members of the band. Look, mental health issues and creativity, I think, somewhat go a little bit hand in hand. So, and no matter how robust your mental health is, doing show after show and then driving all those kilometres and having the early mornings and the late nights, you know, it can be quite taxing. But yeah, there's a lot of check-ins in the Last Drinks. We are all very much looking out for each other. And we've been, this last tour we had 2 new members with us. Well, newish, they just hadn't done international tours with us. They'd done other stuff, but so we didn't know them as well. But I check in with everyone. I know there's a couple of other members that check in with everyone as well, and it's really important. And I like, none of our band likes to have their own room. We've had situations where we had our own bedrooms and they don't like the isolation. I've got a band of massive egos and they all really enjoy, they're all extroverts, they like the company. That doesn't mean they don't like to get a little moment to themselves, but they do. So we sleep in twins everywhere we go. And one of the things that we do that I've found is, it's tiny, but it makes a massive difference, is we always rotate who sleeps in which rooms. So we never have the same 2 sleeping. Like, we always have, it's always like 4 people will get the keys. There's 8 of us travel. 4 people get the keys, and then we're like, who's my buddy tonight? And so it means that there's different dialogues going on between the different members all the time. And it actually, I've found, in the tours where there's been couplings where there's been constant room buddies, there just hasn't been as much free-flowing dialogue about... It's just important for those members who check in to constantly have different band members in there. It's better for everybody's mental health. And it doesn't seem like much, but it actually makes a massive difference to how everyone's getting along. And plus, you know, there's always that dumb shit that happens in the hotel rooms that become those little, like, stories. And those little moments, you know, you have someone who's having a bit of a hard time, and then a red wine bottle explodes in their bathroom, and then they the next day they come down to breakfast, and 2 people have got this in joke. It just creates these little camaraderies within the band, but it's constantly sort of changing, and it makes a massive difference to all of us. But yeah, check-ins. As much as I think that I actually have some issues with how people check in, but I think that there are members of the Last Drinks, when they check in, it's a very genuine check-in, and they will and they follow through with those check-ins as well. So yeah, it's and it's very helpful for us on the road.
Can I speak on that point? Because I think that's really fascinating that on your days off you want to make sure that you're all together and doing stuff, and you want to share your rooms with you. I'm an introvert, so for me to spend the entire day at a venue in a crowded in a crowded room and be around new people every day can be quite taxing. So for me, sometimes the last thing I want to do is be around people. I want to go home to an empty hotel room and I want to have that time alone. And I think especially if you're on a tour bus in America or Europe where you're spending 24 hours together, you know, for me, I really sometimes just need to find that time alone to recharge. Even though that the thing I said I love the most is the connection on the road, sometimes for me that is also the thing that is most challenging. But one of the things I was going to say about checking in with each other is that probably the most useful thing that I have done in the last couple of years was the mental health first aid training that was offered through Crew Care, and we have had such a huge challenge understanding mental health in our industry for so long, and a lot of us knew that we had friends that were really experiencing massive issues, and you know, I know people that have taken their lives and have just really had a bad time because of everything that we do on the road. But I didn't necessarily understand how I could help or what conversations should have and what prompts I should use. So that idea of checking in was sometimes difficult, even though I knew that was really what was necessary. So to have something like that behind me, that now I have all these tools and resources that I can draw on, and I can help people find more professional help if I need to, means that rather than just a random check-in, you know, we're really much more knowledgeable about how we can help our peers and our colleagues.
I think that it's absolutely crucial. And like Cash said, you know, yeah, a check-in, but, you know, not everyone knows how to do a check-in. It sounds as simple as asking someone, yo, how you doing? But I remember before I knew shit about mental health and psychology when I was in music, the idea that I would check in or bring something up when I thought that someone wasn't doing well, to me just was like, oh, you know, I want to bring it up because it'll make them feel worse, and oh, maybe it's private and they don't want to talk about it. So I would avoid having any type of conversation. I thought that was doing the right thing. And so a lot of us are having, you know, we hold a lot of these preconceived notions about how to check in or when to check in or what to say, and are they going to feel judged, and there's still a lot of stigma around. So it's, you know, it's not supposed to be something that everyone just grows up and is completely comfortable with. In fact, it can be supremely uncomfortable to have mental health check-ins because you don't know what's going to come up, and sometimes you don't always feel, you know, equipped to be able to listen. But I think, you know, the mental health first aid and the workplace wellbeing check-ins that we're doing at Support Act hopefully are starting to empower people to just be able to listen better, and to know that sometimes listening is one of the most important gifts that we can give people, as well as, you know, directing them to sort of resources and support when that's needed.
I've even found the question, how did you sleep last night, is a really handy one, because someone who might not be doing great may not actually have the words to be able to say that they aren't doing great. And so some members, I'll be like, how'd you sleep last night? And they'll be like, oh, pretty rough actually. And then you can start the conversation from that point, rather than saying, how are you? It's such a broad thing, and we're all so, I mean, I'm not an expert, but it seems it's so easy to say good. Whereas if you can ask a question around what is happening for the person within their life, what's going on for your family back at home, or like something that's direct and indirect at the same time, is a far more helpful question on the road than how are you, because it's too big.
Yeah, Benny, you also work in mental health. I'd be curious as to sort of how you tackle some of these important conversations.
Yeah, so I guess being a session guy, you're playing with lots of different artists. You're going to have different relationships with different people. But I guess I'll touch on between, I guess, the relationship that myself and Denzel Baker Boy has, but also other artists I play for, like Dallas Woods and other black artists that I play with. And we're all very cultured and knowledge men around our history and our culture and who we are, where we come from. But we're also very well aware that Aboriginal men hold the highest suicide rate in the world. And we have, unfortunately, like a lot of people, and especially in Aboriginal communities, we've lived a lot of our lives at funerals. We've been to more funerals. We go to more funerals than we go to weddings. And unfortunately, a lot of those funerals are people that are our age. Statistically, me being 35 Aboriginal and in the work that I do, I'm a prime person for a suicide statistic. And we know that. So we don't muck around with it. We're very serious on it. If Denzel walks in a room and doesn't give me a big hug and excited, like, you right? He goes, yeah. I'm like, no, you're full of shit. No, you're not. I know for a fact you're not. So we're going to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. I don't care what you think. We're going to talk about it. That's bad luck. I'm big brother, you're little brother, you shut up and talk. We're going to have this conversation. But he does the exact same thing to me. But in that, we make sure that we're not just doing it on tour either. We make sure that myself and Denzel, we have a mandate once a month. There's no music, there's no studio, no drums, no nothing. It's usually a movie. We go and see a movie, we eat popcorn, we talk shit for a couple of hours, and as soon as someone brings up tour, music, drums, album, single, the conversation stops. We don't talk about music. We talk about, I spoke to Denzel before I come in here, and I was like, how was America? He goes, it was great. And when he started talking about the shows, I'm like, I don't want to know about the shows. Where did you eat? Where did you go? What did you see? Like, I've been to America, and so I've been to the same parts, and this is his first time over there. So having those conversations outside of music, it's not always about touring. Dallas is the same. Me and Dallas make sure we catch up once a month, and if not that, it's a phone call once a week. And I think it's great to talk about mental health on tour, and it's great to talk about, there's some artists that I wouldn't have that conversation with because I don't have that relationship. But the main people that I work with, and especially black artists and community members that I work with, it's a very straightforward, honest, open question. And the guys don't give me an option to not talk about it, so I don't give them the option to not talk about it because we take it really seriously. And especially for people like Denzel, who people see the Instagram and they see the festivals and the shows, but they don't see that he's just spent 12 hours in the studio and now he's doing an interview over Zoom and now he's doing a fitting for a photo shoot and he's doing all this in 24 hours and he doesn't sleep for weeks on end. So it's having those conversations outside of too, because it's not just on tour. These things happen. It's also in the background as well with all the other things. So we're very straightforward with each other, very honest. It's, are you okay? No, you're full of shit. I know you're not.
Yeah, it's actually just really inspiring to hear that these conversations are taking place and that people have each other's backs in the industry, because we know in the mental health sphere that these types of conversations can be life-changing, especially when we put ourselves out there and maybe feel a little bit uncomfortable not knowing what's going to come up or what to say. I would say that another thing that's quite interesting though too is that we need to know ourselves to a certain degree. We need to know what we need and how we can meet our own needs to be, I guess, strong enough to help support other people. And it was interesting what you were saying, Kate and Cash, you have different needs at different times. Sometimes, yes, you need that time alone. You want to rest and recharge. And other times you need to reconnect. You need to be around people. You want to talk, be open. Sometimes we don't always know when we need what. And from people who have had experiences with mental health issues, Brendan, you probably could, relate to this. Like sometimes you feel like you need to just not see anyone and like cut yourself off and not respond to texts and not answer your phone. Like, sometimes something like depression will tell you those things. You don't need to see anyone. You shouldn't see anyone. It's going to be bad for you to see anyone. Whereas that's, what we found is the complete opposite. So understanding, the different needs that we have at different moments is crucial for our own mental well-being, and also to empower us to support other people and maybe understand what they might be needing too. Not that there's an expectation of everyone to, be counsellors or psychologists. But I'd be curious to hear from all of you in terms of if you have any sort of non-negotiables, the things that you know when you're on tour that you need at a bare minimum to be able to keep yourself sort of feeling well and being able to, continue to do the work that's important to you.
Well, I get similar to you, Kate. Like I'm an introvert as well, so for me, it's important to push myself to get out and do things. But I need my space. So I'm very lucky that I can get my own room. And so now I'm at a place where I probably wouldn't do an overseas tour if I couldn't get my own room, or at least my own space, just to kind of decompress for a little bit. Because that's, just getting my sleep in order, my routine, getting up, doing some exercise. If you're on a bus and you have no control of that, it's very hard. Like I find it very hard. Sometimes you don't have a choice, like you have to do the bus thing. But even on the bus, there are ways to sort of schedule the days that, okay, well, on the day off, we'll pull in and just get a day room at a hotel or something like that. But I guess just, if it's not a room, just having some space for myself to where I can just decompress and kind of collect myself and then sort of recharge and on with the show.
Yeah, awesome. Even like creating that microstructure in a day, you might not be able to do like a full workout and get the full 8 hours sleep, but maybe if you can control some aspects of a largely uncontrollable environment.
Yeah, well, I think that's the thing. That's right. So you feel you're not in control of a lot of things around touring, and so trying to get control of as much as you can, or at least of a portion that you can command, I think is very important.
Awesome. What about you, Benny? Do you have any non-negotiables?
I'm pretty flexy on my non-negotiables, which I know I shouldn't be, but I am. One of the biggest things we try to do, there's a bit of a group of us within the crew, the Baker Boy crew, that a gym is like a big one, a way to be able to get up early, go to the gym, have a coffee, even just go walk on the treadmill for 10 minutes. You don't have to go in and do a 2-hour session. Just an ability to go and let off some steam, put your headphones in, disappear for a little while, go and get a coffee, and the day starts right. Mm-hmm. Like we've now, no matter how hectic or crappy the day can get, we've started the day off right. My biggest one, and my newest one that I actually got through COVID was I was having a conversation with a brother boy, and he's an artist from Sydney. He's like a multidisciplinary. He's one of those guys that just does everything really good, and he's really annoying. But we had conversations about hobbies and different things, and I realised that I do nothing but my full-time job and music. I actually have nothing else outside of that. I'm like, I go to the gym. He's like, that's not a hobby. That you go to gym so you can go on tour. And he kind of kept calling me on my bullshit. So I took up photography. I went and bought a really crappy little camera, and he taught me how to use it over Zoom. So now when we're on tour and we go away, the first thing I do, so I actually now pack all my drum equipment around my camera bag. My camera bag is number one. So when we stop at the hotel and Toby at 2 minutes goes, we've got 2 hours until a lobby called Grouse, I put my stuff up, I put my headphones in, I grab my camera bag, and I go and walk for 2 hours. And I just look through a lens for 2 hours, try to create something else artistically, have a different outlet that's not music, something that's my own, and I can go and do it on my own. It's my own personal space, but I can still be artistic. I have a brain that doesn't stop. I have depression, anxiety, but I also have ADHD, and I'm on the spectrum as well. So my brain never, ever stops. Even when I'm asleep, it doesn't stop. So I can't just sit and be quiet. I need to actually go out and be artistic and do something. So picking up a camera was like a lifesaver for me through COVID. And I'm able to go do a walk, but now when I'm on tour, you get that 2 hours before sound check. I put my AirPods in and I go and take photos of things. They could be really crap, but I take photos of things and I enjoy it.
I love that, and again, that's sort of backed up in the psychological literature, this sense of not only mastery, so being able to work on something and see how you can improve and learn more about it, but also, and something that's really important, I think, to people in music is to have some sort of a life outside of music and not only solely defining yourself by, this is the work that I do, being able to have other things and say, I'm also a photographer, also I'm an artist, or I'm also a cook, and a lot of these different things, they all, really make up the rich tapestry of who we are as people. So that's awesome. Thanks so much for sharing that, Benny. How about you, Kate? How do you take care of yourself on tour?
I guess my one non-negotiable is trying to make sure I get enough sleep. I know that that is a huge trigger for my mental health if I am not sleeping enough. And for many years, I tolerated the fact that promoters were putting together bad schedules and we were just forced to put up with it. And I think the blessing of COVID was that for the first time in my entire adult life, I had regular sleep, regular food, regular exercise, all of the things that I'd never realised how compromised they were in my adult life. So it sort of really made me reflect on how important they are and how much better I felt when I wasn't constantly doing shift work the whole time. But even, this year I'm still arguing with people that are giving me schedules saying that, we're overnighting from this day to this day to this day, and there'll only be, a 6-hour window to be sleeping. It's like, yeah, but it's not 6 hours, By the time you come home, wind down, get ready for work, that's a 4-hour window of sleep, and that's not good enough. And our industry has put up with that for so long in what is illegal and shouldn't be tolerated, and yet it is still totally acceptable to plan that way. There'll always be times where the truck breaks down, or some emergency happens and you've got to get the show on the road, and you'll do what it takes to make it happen. But we shouldn't be planning stuff like that. And I think for a long time in my career, I was too scared to be vocal about how important things like sleep were. And I think we all just need to have a safe space where if someone is asking you to do those sort of things that will impact on your mental health, even if it's just you don't have time to go and get food, we have to have a space that is safe enough that we can talk about those things openly and frankly, and make sure that we schedule things properly so that we're not missing, basic elements of what it takes to be healthy, exercise, sleep, eating, those things.
Yeah, for sure. Because, there would be no question that, if someone is asking you to do something, that is going to impede your physical safety, like go up and put some rigging without, being secured or on a harness or something, and think, well, what could happen if that goes wrong? People, they don't sometimes take our mental health and well-being as seriously as that. And it's good to see that the conversations are now hopefully shifting to spaces where, yes, this is just what us human beings need at a bare minimum to be able to function, for our minds to be able to function, for us to be able to do the work that you are, contracting us to do. So thanks for sharing that, Kate. I think that is absolutely critical, and I hope that the industry is moving in the right direction there. And Cash, how about you?
I actually am in a position where I can affect the scheduling. So there's a few things. This question's difficult to answer because these things have been put in place over time because of trial and error, and they haven't worked. So for us, if we don't do more than 4 shows in a row, and if we do 5, then we get 2 days off. That's got a little bit to do with my voice, but also if you do it, your booking agents will just plug every day with a gig, and 4 shows and a day off, then 4 shows and a day off is fine. That is a totally acceptable schedule. But if you do more than that, it's the sleep thing. Like, I can run without sleep, but if I do that for 5 days, then I do actually need to sleep. Everybody's mental health will start to suffer for that. But then for me, one of the big things for me, I actually do 10 minutes of yoga and 20 push-ups every day, and which is particularly hilarious because I'll be in a tiny hotel room with a band member, and they'll wake up and I'll be next to them in downward facing dog, and I'll just be like, and but yeah, that getting my heart rate up. I hate walking, and I won't do it. So the idea of going for a walk, that won't happen. I am always sort of on when we're on tour, so at any moment I'll be asked questions. If I'm doing yoga, nobody asks me any questions. And so I do 10 minutes of yoga every day, and then I usually go, when we get to the venue, if I don't have my own dressing room, I'll go to the toilets and sit in the toilet, just for maybe 10 minutes. I'm quite extroverted, parts of me are introverted, but it's just the amount of questions I get asked on the road. It's a lot. And when you've got 8 members, it doesn't matter, when 7 members in a crew, it doesn't matter how much information you put in the worksheet. They won't read it, they'll just ask you, and then you'll have 7 people ask you the same question. So one way of stopping the questions is, a group chat. The WhatsApp group chat saves me a lot, because then one person will ask the question and then someone else will read the worksheet and answer the question. Everybody gets the answer. And also, just sitting on the toilet for 10 minutes. I know it sounds nuts, but it's like no one is going to come in and ask me a question when I'm on the toilet. And so it doesn't even matter if I need to go to the toilet, I'll just go in there. And I know that seems so extreme saying it out loud, but you're usually in an empty venue, you can just go find a space, and if there is no space, then just find somewhere where no one can find me. And I will just need, it could be 2 minutes, it could be 10, I just need a moment to breathe where there isn't anybody else, and then I can spend the next 23 hours totally surrounded by humans, and it's fine for me. But that's for me that's just something I've get the heart rate up. We used to take a skipping rope on the road, and when we'd stop at the petrol station, sort of challenge each other to skip, which was fun because it gets the heart rate up when you're driving and long hours. It's really good. But realistically, for me, if I can just get up in the morning and do 10 minutes of yoga, it's pretty simple. It's an easy commitment. Lobby calls it X amount of time. I need X amount of time to have a shower. 10 minutes before that, get up, do yoga, then and then my day's in a better spot. If I try to commit to 20 minutes, it doesn't happen. So as much as 10 minutes is much, it happens. So that's what I've actually settled on, is this quite a small amount of time, but it actually happens each day, and it makes a big difference to my day.
And that's really important with habit formation too. So, when we're trying to build healthy habits, we don't go, okay, I'm going to sit down and meditate for half an hour or do, 90 minutes of yoga. We find what's workable. And maybe if that's, 1 glass of water, whether that's taking 2 deep breaths, whether that's, trying to get at least, 6 hours sleep, if 8 hours is impossible. So, just working out what is achievable for you, just so you can build that trust in yourself. I think we've run out of time today, but if anyone in the audience has any questions for any of our amazing panellists, Bree.
Yeah, I'm just jumping in, sorry.
Do you want to come and use the mic?
Oh, yeah, sure. Just streaming. We're streaming. Hello, I feel very close to you guys now. I'm a counsellor at Music Vic, and I got the sense that there's heaps of wisdom between all of you, so thank you for all of that. But I counsel a lot of young artists and crew who, are dealing with a lot of the environmental, mental health stuff you touched on quite a bit, actually. Sexual harassment's still there. Boundary setting's really hard. So I was wondering if there was anyone that, if you look back at yourself 10, 15 years ago, boundary setting, what's it like on tour? Is it doable, I guess? And what have you learnt about it, I suppose, in that context?
Which sort of boundaries are you talking about? Like interpersonal boundaries?
Yeah. I mean, it's like an issue more broadly out of the music sector, out of the music industry. But on tour, it's a whole other gamut to say, no to someone in that context, I guess, especially for young people, young artists.
Yeah, I had a lot of issues with that when I was younger. From band managers to production managers, a lot of times where I felt really compromised as a young woman in the industry. I think it's particularly hard because we're one of the few industries where drinking and other substances are not only accepted, but they're encouraged. We've still got riders on most backstage areas. So things like that mean that potentially people's behaviours are not as well monitored as they would be in other workplaces. I think the conversations are changing, which is fantastic. And I think the fact that there's people that, like Jaguar Jones and all of those sort of people that are really being upfront about what is acceptable and what isn't, has meant that a lot of people are happier now talking about it and expressing what their boundaries should be. But and the music review that we've just had, a lot of us would have participated in, is going to help, I think. But I don't think there's an easy answer to it, because I think we all still feel that if we do speak up, our positions might be compromised, and so it's not easy, but it is changing, and I think all we can do is keep having these open discussions about it.
Can I quickly say there too that I think that the world, I hope that the industry that exists now is quite different to the industry that I was in, and I see it being different by things like how many women are not only on stage but also behind the scenes, and it is a different scene to when I started playing. But I think that this question should not just, when we're talking about women and boundary setting and harassment, within the industry. This question should not just be addressed to the women. The actual change comes from the allies and the men around them, and so I think there's a really big job to play there. And for me, I've had some incredible humans around me, masculine, cis men, cis white men humans who've made who have made my life much easier because of their presence, and I think that and their support. And I think that it's very important for the men within the industry to understand how important their support as allies are. So it's not just on the women here. It's actually got a lot to do with the dudes.
Yeah, thanks, Cash. I think that, anyone who can lean into their privilege and be able to stand up in these, these scenes of injustice and discrimination and harassment in this workplace, this is how we can start making changes. And I think that all of you here today really just being so open again about issues to do with mental health and well-being, having uncomfortable conversations, having those important check-ins means that you are all here as mental health allies, and you're part of making this change. And let's just hope that everyone watching at home and anyone who has anything to do with the music industry also feels empowered to be able to have these important check-ins, to have these important discussions, and also check in with yourself, acknowledging, any mental health issues that might be showing up and reaching out and getting support. You can always hit up Support Act. We've got a mental health wellbeing hotline that's available 24/7. And if you wanted to give something like mindfulness a try, we're also partnered with the Headspace app. In case you want to duck off to the toilet and get a couple of deep breaths in like Cash, the Headspace app can help you guide through a little bit of that mindfulness moment. So Headspace are offering anyone with our code 3 months free. So that's Support Act. Get on it. It's a really good practice that's really good for your mind. Thank you, everyone, for joining us at home. Thank you, all of you, for joining us here, live from the Music Market in Collingwood, Melbourne. My name is Ash, and I would love to thank Brendan, Benny, Kate, and Cash for everything today. Thank you so much for being here.